A Tale of Two Sisters, the movie released in the year 2003, that is a slow burning psychological horror film that blends the tragedy, drama, and the supernatural element together. The film begins in a very cold and very sterile hospital environment that see we generally in the psychiatric department, where we see a doctor interviews a patient named girl, that is Sumi, and she is pale and withdrawn teenage girl, and she just sits there emotionlessly, I think not, and just staring at the floor, not answering any of the question that is asked by the doctor himself. And doctor was speaking in a very calm and gentle voice and asking that what has happened with her, is she fine after this treatment, and the question relating with her health and the back event that had taken place with her. Sumi does not respond at all at any of the question, and she just looked tired, broken, and she just feels disconnected from the reality. And the opening actually is very crucial because the film it just sets the tone for the rest of the film, hinting that something terrible has just already occurred, and we are about to uncover the events that led to her breakdown. As Sumi's gaze fade into the distance, we see the screen just transition into a very memory, that is her return to the home part. We see that Sumi and her younger sister, that is Soo Yeon, they both arrive at their isolated countryside home with their father, that is Moo Hyun. We see the house is just large, elegant, beautiful at the same time, and but at the start we see that something is really it feels off about that atmosphere and the house, because the atmosphere is just oppressive and also suffocating at the same time. And they are then joined by their stepmother, that is Yeonju, which greets them with a smile that does not reach her eyes actually. So there is an immediate tension spark between her and Sumi. And as Sumi and Sion just settle into their shared bedroom, Sumi just reassures her younger sister that she won't let her heart hurt you. So this is the communication that they are having between each other. And this small moment establishes Sumi's protectiveness over Soo Yeon and hints that Yeonju may be abusive or not maybe that kind of friendly as she assumed. But however, we soon start noticing subtle oddities in the house, that the color palette just shifts from I think warmer to just colder tones of the movie, and the house creaks and groans as if it is kind of alive. And there is always a constant sense of being watched in this house when we see along the movie. And the hauntings actually begin slowly because we see in the middle of the midnight Sumi just hears soft whimpering, and she turns to Soo Yeon's bed only to realize that she is missing there. Soo Yeon is not there, and she follows the sound to the large wardrobe in their room, and actually wardrobe just hints at something else. Slowly she opens the door and finds Soo Yeon curled up inside, shaking in terror and just causing the havoc. And Sumi just pulls her out and asks what had happened with her. And she responds that there was someone in the room. And this is our first major clue that something supernatural or something that is out of this world or psychological is at play in that house. We see that over the next few days, the tension just escalates between both of them, that is Sumi and Yeonjo. We see that Yeonjo just makes passive aggressive comments, certainly just mocking her, that is mocking Sumi. Sumi finds bruises on Soo Yeon's arm and immediately assumes Yeonju is responsible, and the father Moo Hyun refuses to intervene, appearing emotionally just detached from them. We see that Sumi's anger and paranoia just grow stronger, making us question if Yeonju is truly evil or if something else is gonna happen. And we see on one night Sumi just wakes up and sees a dark figure crawling across the floor, and even we do not get the idea about this figure because it's just too dark and we cannot just really see his face or something like that. Its movements are just unnatural and jerky at the same times, and it looks like a woman with a long and tangled hair. She gasps and turn on the lights and see that there is nothing as usual as the traditional horror thing. And this is the film's first majorly ghostly appearance. We see that, but it remains nearly unclear whether it is a real or kind of hallucination. We see that Hyun just invites relative over dinner, and Yoonju just acts like the perfect housewife, but there's actually fake quality to her behavior. So the dinner is just awkward and filled with very long silences and forced politeness that we can just sense there. Then one of the family guests just suddenly gasps and clutching her chest, Her body just starts shaking violently as if something is possessed by something unseen, and she collapses to the floor, just convulsing. And when she comes to, her face is just pale with terror, and she just tells everyone that there was something under the table, and she whispers. And she describes a ghostly figure crouching in the shadows, staring at them, and the moment just marks the first time an outsider experiences the horror of the house, actually confirming that something sinister or something beyond is happening. We see the next morning Sumi just finds a dead bird inside Soo Yeon's wardrobe, and its neck is just twisted very in a very unnatural way that is not physically possible, and Yeonju just coldly disposes of it. And her reaction is just really casual about this thing. I mean, she should have been a little bit careful and frightened at the same time, but we see no reaction on her face. I mean, and we see that Sumi just snaps, accusing her of being a monster, and Yunju simply smirks and says that you always make things so dramatic, Sumi. So that is the conversation that is taking place between them, and this line actually just feels gaslighting, making us wonder, is Sumi imagining things or not? And we see late at night, Sumi just wakes up to the sound of Soo Yeon screaming, and she rushes to her room and see Yeonju violently dragging Soo Yeon across the floor. We see that slamming her against a cabinet, and in enraged, Sumi just lunges at Yeonju, attacking her with pure hatred. The two just fight viciously, knocking over the furniture, and Moo Hyun enters and separates them. But instead of comforting their daughter, he looks at Sumi with sadness and exhaustion. The next morning, we see that Soo Yeon is missing, that something is just not good. Sumi just searches the entire house but finds no traces of her sister, and she is now worried about her. She finally enters Soo Yeon's room and stops because the wardrobe is closed here. Slowly, she reaches out and opens and just tries to open the wardrobe. Inside, there is nothing, just empty space, and then it hits her because the film rewinds, revealing the very horrifying reality and the thing behind all this thing, that Soo Yeon has been dead all along, and Sumi has been just hallucinating her presence the entire whole time. And there was actually no stepmother. Actually, Sumi was playing both the roles. So this is the thing, or the major plot twist of the movie. And we see that the real Yeonju was never abusive. In fact, she wasn't even in the house for most of the movie. Instead, Sumi is suffering from a dissociative identity disorder, much like we see the other psychological disorders, or split personality disorder, something similar thing, that is a dissociative identity disorder, created Yeonju as a projection of guilt and rage. So what really happened, if you just try to understand that Soo Yeon died in a very tragic accident before Sumi was hospitalized. So we see that after a fight with Yeonju, Soo Yeon just hid inside the wardrobe, and the wardrobe collapsed on her, crushing her to the death. And we see that Yeonju just ignored her cries for help out of spite, and we see the move Yeon just found Soo Yeon's body too late, and this trauma just fractured the Sumi's mind, leading her to create a very alternate reality where the Soo Yeon was still alive and Yeonju was a villain, and she could still save her sister. And after Sumi is taken back to the psychiatric hospital, the real Yeonju returns home. So we see that is now she is the real one. She is composed but just cold at the same time, and revealing that while she was never a monster, she never really truly cared for Sumi or Soo Yeon either. She walks into Soo Yeon's old room, and we see that it suddenly freezes and a dark shadow appears. The air just grows heavily, and the atmosphere becomes more tense and eerie at the same time. And a pale figure just emerges from the darkness that we have not seen, and this is something unexpected, and it is just Soo Yeon's ghost. We see that, and Yeonju just gasps in horror, and the camera just cuts to black, and the film ends. So this is all about the tale of two sisters, and in one of the part we see that that is, I think, one of the most heartbreaking moments of this film, that just comes with the Sumi's father finally confronts her delusions, and Sumi just frantically searches for Soo Yeon, and Moo Hyun says in a very calm but sorrowful voice that Sumi, stop this, you know that this isn't real. And for a brief moment we see a genuine sadness in his eyes. He's not cold and neglectful father, he just simply does not know how to help his daughter. And this is the moment Sumi's world just crumbles, and her carefully constructed reality just collapses, and she is forced to confront the truth that what is the truth now that Soo Yeon is gone and Inju was never the abuser that she presumably just she was assuming that she just abusing and all, and she has been alone in this nightmare all the time, and the weight of her grief just becomes unbearable, leading to her breakdown and eventual return to the psychiatric hospital. Because after Sumi is taken away, the real Yeonju just returns home, and unlike Sumi's monstrous version of her, Yeonju is just calm, detached, and eerily composed. And this is completely opposite of what she has just assumed or believed earlier. And she walks through the house, her face are just expressionless, and she just stunned. And but there's a shift in atmosphere. The house no longer just feels like a place of imagined horror or something like that. Instead, it feels empty because it needs people. Because house is composed of people, people, the family. So she enters Soo Yeon's old room, and the air just grows heavy, and the light just flickers, and then there is a shadow that moves behind her. Slowly from the darkness, a pale ghostly figure emerges that is the Soo Yeon's ghost or the spirit. And Yeonju just gasps in horror, and we see the screen just cuts to back. Up until now, I think the film has been entirely psychological, revealing that Sumi's supernatural experiences were hallucinations caused by her fractured mind. And however, the final moment with Yeonju just suggests that there might be a genuine ghost after all. There are, I think, two possible interpretations of this thing. First one, I think the ghost might be real because Soo Yeon's spirit truly exists and seeks revenge on Yeonju for neglecting her cries for help before she died, I think. And this would mean that while most of the horror was psychological, but there always exists a real supernatural presence that just lingering in the house. Second interpretation that I think it may be around the Yeonju's guilt, that Yeonju's guilt is manifesting, and Yeonju, which is despite her cold nature, may feel some guilt over Soo Yeon's death, and the final scene could represent her subconscious guilt taking shape, just as Sumi's grief just created an entire false reality around her. If you analyze the character of the story and the important role they have in the story, then there comes the first thing that is about the Sumi, which is very unreliable narrator in this movie because in this film she is the tragic protagonist suffering from severe psychological trauma and dissociative identity disorder. She blames Yeonju for Soo Yeon's death and her mind just creates a version of Yeonju that is just sadistic abuser, which is not actually. She keeps Soo Yeon alive in her mind because she cannot face reality. She becomes Yeonju at times, fighting herself in a very desperate attempt to make sense of her guilt, and her breakdown at the end represents her mind finally breaking down under the weight of her grief. And I think, though she is present in much of that film, Soo Yeon is a figment of Sumi's mind, and her ghostly presence represents the Sumi's guilt that she could not save her sister, and a lingering trauma that actually always exists that is in the Sumi's mind because she refuses to accept the Soo Yeon's death and keeping her alive in desperate act of denial. And we see the real versus the imagined. Actually, there are two versions of Yeonju in this film. First is the Sumi's version, the abuser one, where she imagined the thing, a very cruel and sadistic woman who just delights in a very tormenting Soo Yeon, and this is a projection of Sumi's hatred and blame. And we see in the real thing the real Yeonju, which is a cold but not inherently evil woman as described by her, and she may have been distant and even cruel at times, but she was not the monster Sumi has ever imagined. Because the real Yeonju's terrified reaction to see Yeon's ghost suggests that deep down she may feel guilt for what had happened or what she was not able to deliver. And there are many themes and symbolism in this movie. First one, that is the main thing, that is the mental illness as horror. Because the film does not rely on traditional jump scare. Instead, I think it immerses the audience in the Sumi's unstable mind, or the thing that is she just imagining or having hallucination of this thing because she is just unstable, making us experience of fear, paranoia, and grief firsthand. And her dissociative identity disorder just creates multiple reality, and the horror lies in watching them collapse. And second one is I think guilt and depression. The entire movie is manifestation of guilt because Sumi blames herself for not protecting Soo Yeon, and she just projects her anger onto Yeonju, making her a villain. The house itself represents her decaying mind filled with ghosts of the past. And there is the reliable narrator in this film because one of the most brilliant aspects of the film, I think, it is that it uses the unreliable narrator as well as the audience believing Sumi's version of events, that Yeonju is abusive and Soo Yeon is still alive, only to realize that we have been inside Sumi's delusion or the Sumi's mind thing or the hallucination thing entire time. This makes the twist even more impactful as we experience the same emotional devastation that Sumi does when the truth is revealed. So this is all about the movie, and I think the movie is really good. And if you, it's a really hook up movie, and it just stays into your mind for a very long time. If you see that, because the film is shown from certain perspective in the first end, and then at the end when the twist is revealed, then we just get to know the idea of the whole film, that what is happened and what has to be happened in this film, and everything is just interlinked. So it was brilliant writing and direction in this film. So it is a must-watch film, I think. And Korean films are really great, and many of them are underrated in this category, especially the psychological and horror thriller film, I think. So I think it's not just about a ghost story. It is a story about grief, trauma, and the devastating effect of mental illness. I think that was the main character of this movie, the girl character. And the film, I think, does not come from monster or ghost, but from the mind itself. I think that is very dangerous. The way trauma can distort reality, I think, making it impossible to distinguish between what is reality and what is imagination or hallucination. So in the end, I think is the more that is the most terrifying aspect of the tale of two sisters, is that it is not having any kind of ghostly, but it's the realization that something, the past is the, I think, true horror that haunts us. This is, I think, what the movie teaches us and preaches. And if you like such breakdowns, do subscribe Cinema Shadows for more. Thank you.